Hello learners, before we begin the next lecture, let us briefly recapitulate what you learned in the first lecture. We studied about the division of French society into 3 estates. We also saw their power, their privileges. We understood the economic hardships faced by the third estate. In this module, you are going to be made aware of the economic hardships faced by the working class. Moreover, the contributions of various philosophers in the French Revolution will be discussed. Late 18th century France, a period of economic hardship. The third estate constituted of serf, urban working class and bourgeois. Each group of the third estate had their own set of problems, due to which the first 2 classes were struggling for their survival. Each group struggled in the old regime and faced economic hardships. Condition of the third estate. The third estate suffered the most in the feudal society of the old regime. They were at the lowest order of the society, without privileges and rights, and were exploited the most. The third one had economic power and education. So, they wanted a state with economic freedom, social status and political participation. Condition of peasants in late 18th century. Peasants comprised between 82 and 88% of the population and was the nation's poorest social class. The vast majority of peasants were either feudal tenants or day labourers who sought work wherever they could find it. All peasants were heavily taxed by the state. If they were feudal tenants, peasants were also required to pay dues to their local seigneur or lord. These obligations were seldom relaxed during difficult periods such as poor harvests, and the state rarely paid attention to the need of the peasants, thus pushing majority of population towards starvation. Urban working class of the time. The 18th century was a period of industrial and urban growth in France, yet most French cities remained relatively small. Commoners in towns and cities made their living as either skilled artisans or unskilled workers. Ways of earning livelihood. Skilled labourers. Artisans worked in industries like textiles and clothing manufacture, upholstery and furniture, clockmaking, blacksmithing, leather goods, carriage making and repair, carpentry and masonry, etc. A few artisans operated their own business, but most worked for large firms or employers. Before doing business or gaining employment, artisans had to first belong to the guild. A guild was a group of merchants, artisans and craftspeople that managed and regulated his own particular industry. Unskilled labourers. Unskilled labourers worked as servants, cleaners, haulers, water carriers, washerwomen and hawkers. Anything did not require training or membership of a guild. Other means of earning. Many Parisians, perhaps as many as 80,000 people, had no job at all. They survived by begging, scavenging, petty crimes and prostitution. The lives of urban workers, both skilled and unskilled, became increasingly difficult in the 1780s. Parisian workers toiled for low wages, between 30 and 60 sous a day for skilled labourers and between 15 and 20 sous a day for the unskilled. Wages had risen by around 20% in the 25 years before 1789. However, prices and rents had increased by 60% in the same period. Low pay and high prices were compounded by miserable living conditions in Paris. Accommodation for the people of France. Accommodation in the capital was so scarce that workers and their families crammed into shared attic and dirty tenements, most rented from unscrupulous landlords. Most workers economized by sharing accommodation. Many rooms housed between 6 to 10 people. The 12 to 15 per room was not unknown. Conditions in these tenements were cramped, unhygienic and uncomfortable. There were no heating, plumbing or common ablutions. The toilet facilities were usually an outside cesspit or open sewer, while water was fetched by hand from communal wells. Bourgeois or the capitalist or new middle class. Not all members of the third estate were poor. At the apex of the third estate's social hierarchy was the bourgeois or capitalist middle classes. The bourgeois were business owners and professionals who had acquired enough wealth to live comfortably. There were haute bourgeois or high bourgeois who were wealthy merchants and traders, colonial landholders, industrialists, bankers and financiers, tax farmers and trained professionals like doctors and lawyers. Condition of the bourgeois. The bourgeois flourished during the 1700s on the back of France's economic growth, modernization, increased production, imperial expansion and foreign trade. The haute bourgeoisie rose from the middle classes to become independently wealthy, well-educated and ambitious. As their wealth increased, so did their desire for social status and political representation. The bourgeois managed to get entry into the second estate. Changing status of the bourgeois. They had enough money to acquire the costumes, trappings and grand residences of the noble classes. However, they liked their titles, privileges and prestige. The wealthy bourgeois got a place in the nobility through venal officers, but by the 1780s it became too expensive. The unfulfilled social and political ambitions of the bourgeois gave rise to considerable frustration. The high-class bourgeoisie had become the economic masters of the nation, yet government and policy were exclusively under the control of the royal court and its noble favourites. Many educated bourgeois found way in Enlightenment tracts which challenged the foundation of monarchical power and argued that government should be representative, accountable and based on popular sovereignty. Subsistence crisis in late 18th century. An extreme situation where the basic means of livelihood are endangered is called a subsistence crisis. Reasons for subsistence crisis. During the late 18th century, the population of France was increasing, which led to demand for more food grains. There was less production of food grains, due to which price of bread, which was the staple diet of the majority of people, went up. In that situation, the basic needs of the people of France were endangered. Plight of the peasants. The poor peasantry, who barely possessed land and had no technical advancement, were facing difficult situation because of the ongoing high food prices and inflation. The urban poor wages also did not keep up pace with the rise in prices, so the gap between the poor and the rich widened. Things became worse when drought or hail reduced the harvest, which led to a subsistence crisis that occurred frequently in France during the old regime. Shaping of the revolutionary ideology. In the past, peasants and workers had participated in revolts against increasing taxes and food scarcity, but they lacked the means and programs to carry out full-scale measures that would bring about the change in the social and economic order. Awareness among bourgeois. In the French society, there were the groups which the third estate who had become prosperous and had access to education and new ideas. They were the high-class bourgeois. all of these educated class believed that no group in society should be privileged by birth, and a person's social position must depend on his merit. Further, they proposed that administrative posts too need to be filled on the basis of merit. They were the people who were influenced by the idea of classical liberalism, freedom, equality, right of property for all, and democracy. Contribution of the philosophers in the French Revolution. These ideas of the middle class were shaped by a series of philosophers of that time, whose contribution helped to shape revolutionary ideology and plan. Let us study the contribution made by philosophers in shaping revolution, which ultimately not just put end to the old regime, but also gave its substitution. Montesquieu. The first phase of the French Revolution was mainly dominated by the ideas of Montesquieu, as explained by him in his masterpiece, The Spirit of Law. It was first published in 1753. He mocked the French society and criticized France's monarchical absolutism and the church. He offended the authorities, which added to his popularity. Being a Catholic, he believed that people should think for themselves. He also claimed that a liberal constitutional monarchy was the best system of government for the people who valued freedom. He also suggested dividing the sovereignty of the nation between legislative, executive, and judiciary, which provided a permanent check on any one of them becoming despotic. Voltaire. Francois Arouet, who was known as Voltaire, wrote poetry and plays, and for expressing his opinions, he was twice sent to prison. Like Montesquieu, he developed an admiration for British institutions. Voltaire admired Britain's Tolerance Act of 1689 and its absence of censorship. Voltaire widely criticized the old regime and the authority of the church. He was among the French Enlightenment writer, historian, and philosopher. He advocated the separation of church and state and also the freedom of religion. He in 1762 declared that general will was the righteous and truthful way of forming government. Jean-Jacques Rousseau propounded the social contract theory. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 1712 to 1778, is best known for his line about people being born free but finding themselves in chains. Rousseau can be called as the chief ideologue of the French Revolution. In his book Social Contract, he suggested a government based on social contract between people and their representatives, thus leading to the establishment of a representative form of democracy where people will be ruled by the representatives chosen by themselves. John Locke. John Locke was an English philosopher who lived until 1704. He came up with the ideas of empiricism, epistemology, and the social contract. People learned what ideas they later held by influences upon them in life by others from a multitude of directions such as church, parents, work, schooling, peers, research, etc. Locke's philosophy had a direct influence on Rousseau. In his two treatises of government, John Locke sought to refute the doctrine of the divine and absolute right of the monarch. He strongly propounded a society and government based on right, equality, choice, and individualism. He said, man is born weak, but it is the duty of the state to give rights so as to make man strong and a capable individual. Now students, let us summarize. These were the socio-economic conditions of the old regime which consequently led to the revolution. The grievances of the people were given direction and shape by a series of middle-class philosophers whose idea became the part of daily discussion in salon or streets. This forced the people to come on streets of Paris against the political order of the old regime. In the next lecture, we will learn about the outbreak of the revolution. Thank you.